Hi, it's Maija here with my wrap-up of books 16 to 20 that I've read this year. I am very behind on my wrap-ups. But this is a bit of an unusual wrap-up for me because I'm only going to be talking about one science fiction book and one fantasy comic, and then the rest of the things that I'm going to talk about are two non-fiction books and one play. As always, I will leave timestamps to the separate reviews in the description so you can click on the ones that you are the most interested in. So first I'm going to talk about a science fiction novel, and that was Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, which I read from the library. And this, as you may know, tells about an expedition of 4 scientist women into Area X, which is this place where nature has gotten pretty weird. And they are the 12th expedition to enter, and something bad has happened to pretty much all of the previous expeditions. So I didn't think that this book would be for me, so this was a huge surprise by how much I really loved this book. So this book has been on my radar, I knew about this series, but I wasn't that interested in it because I'm not big into new weird or stuff like that. But when I heard that there was a movie coming out, I thought I'd try it out. And it was very short, so let's just try it out. And I was so surprised, I was completely captivated by this. I read the first half in one sitting, which is quite rare for me. In the end, I finished the book in 3 sittings, and I think the best thing for me would have been to finish it in 2, because I read the last chunk of it on the bus, and then I wasn't really that into that part, the ending part that I read. So I think that if I had read it in 2 sittings, I would have been completely captivated by the atmosphere without any pauses to break my concentration, and I would have really liked the end part more. I think the part that I loved, that really got me, was the writing style. For some reason I just couldn't stop reading it and I wanted to know what would happen, and this was a pretty big surprise. So I already have the second book authority from the library, but I was very pleased that the first book completely works as a standalone. It is basically a standalone book, but there are 2 more in the series. I gave Annihilation 4.5 stars. I really liked how not much was answered and how weird everything was. I did see the movie later on, and it is pretty much completely different from the book, apart from the setting and the main premise. So if you have seen the movie, you can still read the book and get a completely new experience. I personally preferred the book more. Now moving on to the non-fiction. First I'm gonna talk about The Black Count, Glory, Revolution, Betrayal and the Real Count of Monte Cristo by Tom Rice. This is a fascinating story about General Alex Dumas, who was the father of the novelist Alexandre Dumas. And Alex Dumas was an aristocratic black man rising through the military ranks and commanding armies in historical France. He was the son of a white French nobleman and a black slave woman. He was born in Saint-Domingue and later traveled to France with his father and joined the army. And this is also the story of the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon and the racial policies of late 1800s, early 1900s France. I think the reason why this takes a pretty wide look into the history of France and the French Revolution is because the author might not have a ton of material on Alex Dumas. I did learn a lot while reading this, and he did find some completely new material locked in a safe. So most importantly, of course, I learned about the existence of General Alex Dumas himself, but also some very interesting facts about race in historical France, like the existence of the National Colonial Institute, which was an interracial elite secondary school in 1790s Paris and was later shut down under Napoleon. I also learned about many instances of racism that have modern counterparts. For example, France was big on being the land of the free, there being no slaves on French soil. Their ships and the colonies were another story. So when slaves escaped from the colonies and came to France, a lot of them were set free in these freedom trials. Of course, there were people who weren't big into this and were like, oh, the freedom principle was always meant to be just for white people. But this would lead to some people in charge coming up with these depots, essentially prisons in French harbors, and they were not considered to be on French soil. So they were extraterritorial, and when people would come to the harbor, they would just put them into these depots, and then they would be free to deport them back into the colonies. I gave this one 4.5 stars. This was on my 5-star prediction video, so I did pretty well with that. And the reason why I took the 0.5 stars off was that I got a bit bogged down with some military campaigns in the middle of the book. And also I would have liked for there to be pictures in this book, because the author talks about some paintings and portraits and statues about Alex Dumas, and I would have liked to see what the author is describing, even though I found some of that stuff online, but I would have liked for them to be in the book. I also learned that there was a statue of Alex Dumas near the statue of his son in Paris, but it was taken down by the Nazis and a new one was never erected. And I would highly recommend this book to everyone. As a little aside, Goodreads says that this book has 414 pages, but this essentially ends on page 340, so it's not that long. The rest of the book are citations and stuff like that. The second non-fiction book that I read was How to Be a Victorian by Ruth Goodman, which I read together with Rachel from Kalanadi and Kelsey from The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. And this is a fun and informational look into the everyday lives of Victorians. It goes through their day. That is the way that the book is organized. So it starts with chapters like getting up and getting dressed and ends with chapters like a bath before bed and behind the bedroom door. So the best thing about this book, apart from the very large amount of interesting topics that it covers, is that it doesn't focus on any one class. So it compares and contrasts these things between different classes, and I think the focus might be a bit on the lower class side, which I found to be refreshing. So for example, the hairstyling chapters might be more from the upper class perspective, and then the food chapters might be from a lower class perspective. And if you want to know about things like beard styles through the Victorian era, or how Victorians did their laundry or where they worked, read this book. A lot of the focus, I have to say, is on London, but we also take a look at farmers and fishers and miners in different parts of the country. I'm gonna say that this could be a useful read to people who think that women in Victorian times just stayed at home looking after the kids and didn't work. I'm just gonna give out a little example of a factory working family. So for example, mother and father would be working in the factory and the oldest boy would be looking after his siblings until the point where he got old enough to get more money from his wages at the factory than the mother. And then the mother would stay at home to look at the kids and the young boy would go to work. So I gave this one 4 stars. I learned some very interesting tidbits and it was fun all the way. The play that I read was Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw, and this is the play that the movie My Fair Lady is based on. So it tells about Henry Higgins and his friend who take upon themselves to turn Eliza, who is this flower girl from the streets, into a lady and pass her off as a member of high society at a party. And they don't really consider Eliza's feelings or what she would do after this bet is over. I decided to read this because Libby Stevenson posted a video called Pygmalion, My Fair Lady and How Hollywood Ruined Feminism, and I thought I'm gonna read the play first and then I'm gonna watch the video, which I still haven't watched, but I will. I really liked how Shaw was very against Higgins-Eliza relationship, and also how the reader's sympathy is always on Eliza's side, and I find this to be very much worth a read. I gave it 4 stars. And finally, the fantasy comic that I read was Another Castle Grimoire by Andrew Wheeler and Paulina Ganucheau, which is a comic aimed at younger readers from about 10 up or something like that. And this tells about Princess Misty of Beldora, who is kidnapped by the evil ruler of the neighboring kingdom called Grimoire. So she is expected to marry him, but she has a chance to escape, and then she decides to stay and help overthrow the villain because of the way that he treats his monster citizens. I picked this comic up because of Paulina Ganucheau's gorgeous pastel-colored art and great character designs, like this gargoyle jailer who bakes, or this lady with snakes for hair. The story, on the other hand, was very abrupt, and especially the beginning was very ham-fisted. I was like, oh, what's gonna happen? It got a bit better. There were some interesting story beats, but the story was very thin. But the art and the monster designs were so very pretty that I gave this one 3 stars. The art totally rated up from like 2 stars or something like that. So those were all the books that I'm going to talk about in this wrap-up. I read this book all the way back in February. But let me know in the comments if you have read any of these, and let's talk more there, and I will see you in my next video.